All right. Well, to start things off today, let's state the obvious. How about them Houston Texans, huh? Poor old Cleveland got a beat down. Beat down yesterday. Well, hey, I'm glad that you were here in this warm place on this beautiful, beautiful Sunday morning here in Houston. If you're brand new to Second, brand new to church, welcome. Really glad that you're here today. You know, it's interesting in society and cultures, we have different trends and movements that make its way through. And even in the church, believe it or not, there are different movements that happen that affect almost every church in a country. And back in the 90s, if some of you can recall, there was a movement called the Seeker movement. Yes, the Seeker movement. And the Seeker movement basically had the premise that people are seeking God. There are people all around us that we work with, people who we hang out with, we work out with, people in our family that are seeking God. So we need to try to start organizing our churches around that reality and to make our churches, to use the terminology from that movement, more seeker sensitive. That means simply to be more aware of the questions that people are having in the time and place that we're living. Seeker. I like the word seeker. It's a fun word to say. Say it. Say seeker. Let's try it again. Seeker. I don't know, it's just fun. Seeker. We're seekers. We're all seeking, aren't we? Every one of us here is seeking something. It's simply, it's kind of what we do as human beings. We're innately people. We're curious people, and we are seeking. And you know, some of us are seeking happiness. Others are seeking, meaning and purpose. Others are seeking to make it through this sermon. You know, you're seeking something. We're all seekers. You know, psychologists and psychoanalysts have been fascinated with that since the dawn of the modern age. You know, Sigmund Freud, he believed that the primary thing that we're seeking is pleasure. And then another colleague of his said, no, it's not pleasure. Alfred Adler said, we're seeking power. And then finally, Viktor Frankl came on the scene, and Frankl said, no, it's not pleasure, it's not power that we're seeking as humans, but we're seeking a sense of purpose and meaning. And if I had to look at those three different schools of thoughts, I think I would lean and agree more with Frankl there. Obviously, we're pleasure-seeking, power-seeking people, but ultimately we need a sense of meaning and purpose. Meaning and purpose. So as we're seeking in these various things, or seeking certain emotions, if you would, or certain states of being, we're probably simply seeking meaning. Meaning. Rick Rubin has been a uber successful music producer. He has worked with different acts like the Beastie Boys, Run DMC, Metallica, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and even Johnny Cash. Time magazine said that Rick Rubin is one of the most 100 influential people in the world. He is worth probably around $300 million. And someone talked to him about his success, and here's what Rick Rubin said about success. Listen to this. He says, it's hard to get really depressed until your dreams come true. Once your dreams come true, you realize you feel the same way you did before. Then you get a feeling of hopelessness. Rick Rubin has lived almost every single aspect of the American dream. He has worked with some of the most popular and influential musicians in the world. He's known, had connections, and still does with some of the most famous, influential people in the world. He has made a ton of money. But he says, in his own words, that's still not enough. I know what you're thinking, but I would be different. I would be satisfied. Would you? Would I? Rick says he's still seeking. We're all seekers. You know, it's interesting. There's a story in a passage I want us to look at today. And I want us to look at this passage through the lens of seeking. Seeking. I think so many times the story that we're about to read today, it gets lost in a whole big ton of blubber. But the story is about seeking. Let's listen to this and see what he was seeking. It's found in the book of Jonah. Right? Jonah, chapter number 1. Turn there. If you have a Bible, Jonah chapter number 1. Jonah is towards the end of the Old Testament. Listen to this. He said, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh, which was this major metropolitan, fast-paced city, and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port, and after paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish in order to flee from the Lord. Jonah knew the Lord. Jonah knew where he could go to for the source of meaning and purpose. Jonah even had a specific task to do from God. The word of the Lord came to him, and yet Jonah willingly rebelled against God. As a human being, he used his freedom of choice to choose to go and run away from God. God said, go this way. Jonah said, no, I'm going that way. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to find my own path. I am going to stand on my own 2 feet. I am the captain of my ship. I am the master of my fate. I can find myself, my authentic self, by running in the other way. And that's what he did. And what happened to him? He found himself in the wrong place, which is outside of God's will for his life, with the wrong people. He's on this ship with people, strangers, sailors who didn't know who he was, didn't care about what God had told him, and he had the wrong purpose. Wrong place, wrong people, wrong purpose. And, it's easy. We're in church. I'm in church today. I got a suit on. I got a Bible. It's easy for me to judge Jonah. Well, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have run away from God like that. If God had spoken a clear word to me, I would have gotten in line. Maybe. Sometimes. But sometimes, like Jonah, we all run astray. We all know that direction that God sent us, but we think maybe I can figure out a way, a workaround, a loophole, and jump on my own little ship to Tarshish. That's what Jonah did. He willingly went against God's purposes and plans for his life. He made a choice. It's amazing, isn't it? He made a choice. God gives all of us ability to choose. To choose. And there's something down inside every one of us that God has placed inside of us, whether we recognize it's from our God or not, that something tells us whether a choice is right or wrong. And many times that plays out in the consequences. And as things played out in Jonah's consequences, you know that the weather started getting rough. The tiny ship was tossed, right? And the sailors didn't know what to do. But Jonah was in the bottom of the boat. He knew what was going on. He could read the weather. He knew that this sign, this storm, was actually from God, and it was his fault. But we'll get to that in a second. Jonah's trying to find meaning outside of God. You see, all of us have a relationship with God. Everyone here has a relationship with God. Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, all have a relationship with God. Those are some of the leaders of the new atheist movement. Everyone has a relationship with God. Why? Because God made us. God designed us. God has put a desire for him inside of us. So part of us wants to go to God, a part of us wants to go away from God, but we all have a relationship with God. Jonah did. Jonah knew God had said, I'm going to go my own way. I'm going to find my own path. Another guy in history who did that was a guy by the name of Augustine. Augustine is he's the most influential Christian in the history of the church outside of the Bible. So once John died, the last apostle in 90 AD, the most influential Christian in the church, about 250 years later, is Augustine. Augustine was a seeker. He was seeking after great intellectual knowledge. He was having great success as a teacher, as an orator in Milan. He was also a seeker of pleasure. He liked to woo women. He lived together with his girlfriend out of wedlock for 9 years. They had a kid out of wedlock. He dabbled into Neoplatonism. He got into Manichaeism, all these different philosophies, trying to find a sense of meaning. Meanwhile, his mom prayed for him and prayed for him and prayed for him until finally he woke up, turned to the God that he had heard of but never followed, and gave his heart and life to Christ. And it was Augustine who wrote these iconic words in his own spiritual autobiography when he said, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." Seeker. Seeking all these things, seeking all this stuff until he found God, and Augustine set the world on fire. How do we know if we're on track right now? How do we know if we're where we need to be? How do we know if we're living out God's purposes and plans for our life? Well, you need to do a check. A check. I don't know who the poet was that wrote those words years ago. You need to check yourself before you wreck yourself. It's true. You need to check yourself. Do an inventory of the choices you're making. What are you choosing to do? Because the choices that you make are a reflection of the ideal or the person you want to become. The choices you make, that I make, reflect the essence and the purpose of our life. So do a inventory check of your choices. Look at your schedule. How do you spend your time? Those reflect choices. Those reflect your values. Those reflect your purposes. Look at your checkbook. Look at your credit card statement. Thank you, Apple. They'll show you how much time you're spending on social media, comparing your life to other people's lives. Seeing how you're doing in the celebrity sweepstakes. There are many ways we can look and do a choice check, an inventory check of the choices we're making, because the choices you're making are either bringing greater freedom in your life or more bondage in your life. And this is what's wild about God is God gave us the freedom. God gave us this sense of agency to choose. And because God made us, and Kierkegaard talks a lot about this, we can't find our true selves, our authentic selves, if you would, unless we are tethered to this God who made us. Otherwise, we're always running around, seeking here, seeking there, seeking this. And we've been made for God. As Paul was addressing a group of seekers years ago in the Areopagus in Athens, he said, it's in him we live and move and have our being. I want to get in line and flow with him and his purposes and his plans. Do a check, a choice check. Now, Jonah, back to his story, trying to find himself, trying to authenticate himself by being a rebel. They didn't have Colorado back then. They didn't have France back then or Europe to go find yourself. He had to go to Tarshish. He's on the way there on the boat, right? The weather's getting rough. They're going crazy. He tells these sailors, hey, listen, it's my fault. What? They're not really into the same God that Jonah believes in. No, throw me overboard. No, we're not going to do that. Throw me overboard. No, we're not going to do that. Finally, they throw Jonah overboard. They say this kind of prayer they made up, the sailors do. And when they do, water's still. Jonah gets swallowed up by this fish, right? He's in the fish for 3 days until he prays, right? Crazy. I'm praying as I'm going down in the water. Help. Get me out of this big mess. I'm not going to wait for Jaws or Orca to swallow me. But I'm not Jonah. It's not part of the story. He gets there. He finally cries out to God. Cries out to God. So here he is in rebellion, experiencing the consequences of his rebellion. There are consequences to our choices. But look at Jonah 3. Skip over a couple of chapters. It's a short book. Jonah 3, verses 1 through 3. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Isn't that great? I'm so thankful that God gives us second chances. I'm so thankful that God did this for Jonah. God does this for us, not second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, right? God gives us his word. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Here it is, Jonah, in case you missed that first text. Let me spell it out again. Go to the great city of Nineveh, proclaim its message I give you. And Jonah obeyed, followed the word of the Lord, and went to Nineveh and did what God told him to do. You know what happened? People of Nineveh came to God. All these people who didn't know God from Godzilla, who were doing their own thing, living just a crazy life, right? Seeking success and all this stuff, they came to know God. Jonah was in line. God gave Jonah a second chance. Now, what's crazy about the book of Jonah, it's one of the things I like about it, is we don't know what happened. I think a lot of times we think the Bible's a book of answers. The Bible's a book of questions. Questions. Yes, there are answers, but there are a lot of questions. The whole book of Jonah ends with a question mark. We don't know, doctor, if he ever got a third chance, because Jonah got mad at God. He got hacked off when these Ninevites repented. He was wanting God to rain down some judgment upon their heads. He was wanting a little bit of vengeance. And the book ends with a question. God's questioning Jonah, and then the end. Right? Is there another season? No, there's not. We're left wondering what happened to Jonah. Will God give him a third chance? Will he give him the third word of the Lord? Will Jonah get back in line with God's purposes for his life? We won't know until we're on the other side. So, Let's go back and talk about what we do know. I like what Mark Twain said. Mark Twain said, it's not the things in the Bible I don't know that worry me, it's the things that I do know and don't do. So let's go back to the Bible. Jonah's there, gets the second word of the Lord. Revival breaks out in Nineveh, right? Jonah's, right, this Billy Graham prototype, if you would. Then he finds himself where? In the right place. That's in the middle of God's will. With the right people, these Ninevites who are now new converts to belief in God. And he has the right purpose, doing what God told him to do. His life's in alignment. He's understanding the purposes and the power of God. I like the Westminster Catechism, question 1. You know, if you grew up in any kind of church background, whether it's Catholic or Presbyterian, of all things Baptist, right? We have these questions, catechisms that you have to go through, answer questions if you're new to the faith. The first question, question 1 in the Westminster Catechism is this: what's the chief end of man? That means, why am I here? What should we be seeking? The chief end of man, our purpose, our end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. That's why we're here. So, in a general yet specific sense, if I can use those two words together, all of us have been created to do that. To glorify God means that we see all of our life as a chance to honor God, and I do it unto him. So I can study unto him. I can seek to achieve in my job and my career unto him. I take my gifts and my talents and I do what I can with them, and I do this unto him. That's what it means to glorify God. I want to honor God in everything that I do and enjoy him forever. What do we enjoy? We enjoy who he is and what he's done. And right now we know who he is and what he's done through the power of the gospel. It says the word of the Lord came to Jonah. The word of the Lord came to Jonah. Well, we know because of Christmas, right? The word of God has come to us. That's Jesus Christ. In the beginning was the Word, the Logos, the reason, the essence, the purpose. And the purpose, the essence, the Word has become flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only, filled with grace and truth. So we can enjoy God and know him by enjoying the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because it's through the gospel that we see what God is like. It's through the gospel that we see what Christ is like. It's through the gospel that we see how we're supposed to live our lives, which is perfectly like Christ. It's through the gospel that we see I don't live my life perfectly. I miss that standard by a long shot. It's through the gospel that we see the solution to the problem of missing the mark, and that is that Christ lived a perfect life for us, died a sacrificial death, rose again on the third day. So it's through the gospel that we see the forgiveness and the depth of God's love and care for us. It's through the gospel that when we come to know him and say yes to Christ, that we're forgiven, we're restored, we're adopted, and then now we're put on a path where we can begin to live out God's plans and purposes for our life. True freedom is understanding who God is and what God has designed me to do. And that's good news, isn't it? The gospel's good news. The word of the Lord's come to all of us, and that's why I'm here today, and that's why we're here today. We want to talk about this good news and share this good news. And I share this news with you, and you share this news with others around you, not as people who have it all together. I have a buddy of mine in Florida, and one of the slogans of his church is this: no perfect people allowed. Or to put it another way, we are not a country club for saints, but we're a hospital for sinners. Or as my dad always said, we're one beggar telling another beggar where to get bread. Now, we don't want to stay there. We go to the hospital to get healed. We get food to be filled. But we're all in this process, on this path that God has placed us on by responding to his gospel. Right place, in the middle of God's will. Right people. Those who are seeking God, seeking his purposes, and the right purpose, which is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. What's amazing, one of the things that's amazing to me about God and about this whole seeking situation, that we're all seekers, is that we need to remember, and you need to remember, that as you're out there seeking, that there is a God who knows you and who loves you and who's seeking you. And he's the one. God is the one who can give your life ultimate meaning and purpose. Pray with me, if you would. God, thank you. Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for being patient with us. Thank you for sending the word of the Lord to us, not once, not twice, but so many times. God, we want to respond to that word today. God, there's someone here today who've never responded to your word. They've never turned their life over to you. They've never received this offer of free forgiveness and grace that you have provided for us. They've never really personally appropriated that. They've never internalized that in their minds and heart. God, it's my prayer that they would do that today. Today. May they come to you today just as they are and experience this gospel, this powerful gospel of grace. Lord, there are others here today that have experienced your grace, your gospel. They know you. They're walking with you. They're simply looking for a place to belong, a place to grow, a place to serve, and you're leading them to second. God, I pray that they would come down front as well and say, hey, I want to join this church family today, or we want to join this church today. God, I thank you you've designed us to live in community. Lord, lead those who need to stand and respond to your word today is our prayer.